Canada's very own soccer league, the Canadian Premier League, is here and officially set to kick off. So it will open up its inaugural season with 7 teams: Cavalry FC, FC Edmonton, Forge FC, Halifax Wanderers FC, Pacific FC, Valor FC, and York 9 FC. And we'll start off using the split spring and fall seasons type of format, also known as the Apertura and Clausura format, which is used in Mexico's Liga MX and other leagues in Latin America. And the NASL, North American Soccer League, use this format as well. So the winners of the spring and fall seasons will play for the CPL Championship in the championship final game, and the CPL champion will earn a berth to what is called the CONCACAF League next year, which is a qualifying tournament for the CONCACAF Champions League. But for this year's edition of the CONCACAF League, the berth will be granted to one of the inaugural teams, which are FC Edmonton, Forge FC, and Valor FC, depending on their records against each other in the spring season. And our domestic cup competition, the Canadian Championship, has now expanded to 13 teams with the addition of the Canadian Premier League, with 4 of the CPL teams opening the tournament in the first round, and then those inaugural teams will enter in the second round. But without further ado, let's introduce the teams of our Canadian Premier League. Let's start with a team representing Calgary, Cavalry FC, playing at Spruce Meadows in Foothills County, Alberta. Their coach is Tommy Wheeldon Jr., who led the Calgary Foothills to the USL Premier Development League Championship last year. They also reached the PDL Championship final in 2016 as well. So it was 2 finals appearances and the championship in 4 years under Wheeldon Jr. And for the Calvary FC roster he has put together for his Canadian Premier League team, the 2 goalkeepers are: young Canadian Marco Carducci is a local boy and Vancouver Whitecaps product, who was Coach Wheeldon Jr.'s keeper with the Calgary Foothills last season, helping them to the championship and winning the Golden Glove while named to the 2018 PDL All-League team. Young Canadian Nico Giansopoulos, joining from Devonport City of Australia. And for the defenders, young English defender Nathan Mavilla is coming over from Dulwich Hamlet FC of his country. Canadian Dean Northover had the most appearances all time for the Calgary Foothills club. Young Canadian Chris Serban is a Vancouver Whitecaps product. The Calgary native was part of their Calgary Foothills team as well. Veteran Canadian Mason Trafford is a former Vancouver Whitecaps and Ottawa Fury man. He signed coming over from Miami FC initially of the NASL, then the National Premier Soccer League champs last year. Veteran Canadian Jay Wheeldon is the coach's brother and played for him with the Foothills as one of their main defenders. And young Canadian Dominic Zator is a local boy and was the Foothills top defender. Over to the midfielders, young Canadian Elijah Adekube played his whole career with the Foothills since his first PDL season. German Julian Boucher is a former DC United man. He played for the LA Galaxy 2 of the USL Championship last season. Young Canadian Sergio Camargo is a Toronto FC product. He played with the Foothills Championship squad last year. Young Honduran Jose Escalante signed coming over from Utah FC of his country. Canadian Mauro Eustachio is a former Ottawa Fury and FC Edmonton man, coming from Penn FC of the USL Championship at the time. 19-year-old Canadian Malik Hamilton is a local boy and a West Ham United product. He played for Toronto FC 2 of the USL Championship last year. Veteran Canadian Nick Ledgerwood, the former FC Edmonton man, was a captain of that Foothills Championship winning team. 17-year-old Canadian Victor Laturi is a Calgary native who played in the Foothills FC Generation program. Brazilian Oliver Menetel is a former Ottawa Fury man, coming over from South Melbourne of Australia. Young Canadian Carlos Patino is a FC Edmonton product, played last year for the Foothills. And young Canadian Joel Waterman was a second-round pick in the CPL MYsports draft from Trinity Western University. On to the forwards, 20-year-old Canadian Gabriel Bittar was the first overall pick in the CPL MYsports draft out of Carleton University. Young English forward Jordan Brown is a product of West Ham United. He signed coming over from Znojmo of the Czech Republic. Veteran Congolese international Dominic Malanga is a Monaco product. He also played for Torino before. He's coming over from Chania, a Greek club. And Canadian Nico Pasciotti was a key player for the Calgary Foothills and was second all-time in appearances. Next up, we have none other than FC Edmonton. They of course played in the NASL before joining the CPL, therefore given the status as one of the inaugural teams. They can now return home in front of their fans at Clark Stadium. And the coach of their CPL campaign is Jeff Paulus, who has been assistant coach for FC Edmonton, also working as their academy director, as well as the club's youth side previously. So for his CPL side he has young Canadian goalkeeper Connor James, who is a local boy drafted in the first round, 7th overall in the CPL MYsports draft out of the University of Alberta. Young Canadian goalkeeper Dylan Pally, signed coming over from FC Gute of Sweden. For the defenders, young Canadian Amr Didic is an Edmonton native and former FC Edmonton Academy product. He's joined coming from San Antonio FC of the USL Championship. Young Cameroonian Gino Esua, signed coming over from Rainbow Bamenda of his country. Trinidad and Tobago international Kareem Moses played for FC Edmonton in the NASL back in 2014 and 2015. He has returned coming over from FF Yarrow, a Finnish club. Veteran Spanish defender Ramon Soria is a Villarreal product and former Ottawa Fury man. He signed coming over from Formentura of his country. Young Canadian Melee Tangua is a Montreal Impact product. He last played for Valencia Phoenix of Australia. Canadian defender Alan Zabi is an FC Edmonton product and played for the Eddies his whole career and will continue that now. Over to the midfielders, Canadian Randy Edwini Bonsu is a Vancouver Whitecaps product and former player. He's returning to Canada from Tennis Borussia Berlin of Germany. Young Canadian Ajay Cabra signed from the Calgary Foothills of the PDL out of their championship season. Young Canadian Philippe Lincourt-Joseph is another Montreal Impact Academy product. He's coming over from Al Roustak and Omen Club. Veteran Haitian midfielder James Marcelin is a former Portland Timbers man. He's coming from Miami United FC of the MPSL. Canadian Adam Mortozzi is another FC Edmonton product and played for them in the NASL in 2013 to 2014 and is now returning. South Korean Sun Young Chan signed coming over from Indian club Ozone. Young Canadian Bruno Zebi was an FC Edmonton player and academy product. He won a championship last year with the Calgary Foothills as well. And for their forward, Canadians, 17-year-old Prince Amanda, 18-year-old David Doe, and 17-year-old Marcus Velado Sagai are all products out of their academy. Doe also played for their NASL side in 2017. Veteran Canadian Tommy Amabi is the Eddie's second all-time leading scorer and is back for more. He played for FC Cincinnati in the USL Championship last year. Young Belgian Omar Diop signed coming over from his country's side Tynan. And young Canadian Ajay Sarkaria is a local boy and a second round, 8th overall pick in the MYsports draft out of the University of Alberta. Now over to Hamilton with their team Forge FC. They are also one of the inaugural teams, having been one of the founding teams. Their home is Tim Hortons Field, and their coach is Bobby Smirniotis, who is a co-founder of Sigma FC of League One Ontario, while also serving as their head coach. He was also a coach in the academy system of Greek giants Olympiacos FC. And for the roster of his team, his goalkeepers are Canadian Tristan Henry joining from his Sigma FC side, and young Canadian Quillen Roberts is a Toronto FC product. He was part of Los Angeles FC's inaugural campaign last season. And his defenders, young Canadian Kwame Awua played for his Sigma FC side as their product, before being drafted by New York City FC, now reuniting with his coach after a couple seasons in the MLS. 19-year-old Canadian Clay Sella is a Toronto FC product as well as playing for Sigma FC last year. Canadian Jonathan Grant was part of Sigma FC in 2 stints in his youth. He's reuniting with his coach coming back from Swedish side Nyköpings. Young Belgian Daniel Crutzen, side coming from Reading United of the USL Championship. 18-year-old Canadian Monty Mosan is a former Ottawa Fury man, joining from Sigma FC as well. Cameroonian Bertrand Owundi Echo was with Minnesota United last season. And young Canadian Dominic Samuel is another player signed from Sigma FC. Over to his midfielders, young Swedish midfielder Alexander Akianati Jonsson, side coming over from IFK Varnamo of his country. Canadian Kyle Becker is a Sigma FC product, and former Toronto FC and Montreal Impact player. He played for USL Championship side North Carolina FC last year. 20-year-old Canadian midfielder Tristan Borges, signed coming over from FC Heerenveen, a Dutch club. Young Canadian David Chouanier is a former Montreal Impact player and academy product. Young Senegalese international Elimane Oumar Cissé, signed coming over from Diabars of his country. Canadian Giuliano Frano also signed out of Sigma FC as one of the team's top players. Finally, for his forwards, young Canadian Chris Nanko is a former Sigma FC player and product. He's reunited with his coach after a couple seasons with Bethlehem Steel of the USL Championship. Young Canadian Anthony Novak signed out of League One Ontario side Oakville Blue Devils. Young Canadian Cadell Thomas is also joining from Sigma FC. Canadian Emery Welshman is a former Sigma FC player and product, as well as Toronto FC. He is on loan from MLS expansion side FC Cincinnati, reuniting with his coach. And 20-year-old Canadian Marcel Zajac is joining after playing college soccer in the University of Akron in the NCAA. Out to the Halifax Wanderers FC, who play at the historic Wanderers grounds. They are coached by Stephen Hart, who is the former Canadian national team and Trinidad and Tobago national team head coach. And this is a team that he has put together. Young Canadian goalkeeper Christian Oxner is a local boy, who was drafted in the 3rd round of the CPL MYsports draft out of St. Mary's University. Veteran Trinidad and Tobago international goalkeeper Jan Michael Williams has joined his former national team coach, coming over from Zacatecas of Guatemala. And the defenders, Canadian Andre Bona was a 2nd round, 10th overall draft pick in the MYsports draft from Université du Québec at Montreal. Canadian Alex de Carolis, signed coming over from Umeå FC, a Swedish club. Canadian Shakib Hassin, signed coming over from Finnish side Akinias. Young Canadian Zemzela Langua is a Vancouver Whitecaps academy product, coming over from Socoalanos of Spain. 20-year-old Canadian Krisnovich Ensa is coming out of the Montreal Impact Academy. Young Canadian Peter Chalet was their 1st round pick out of the MYsports draft, 5th overall from Cape Breton University. And young Canadian Zachary Secunda is another Montreal product. He's coming over from North Coast City of Australia. Now for their midfielders, 17-year-old Canadian Scott Firth is a local boy, coming from Suburban FC in Nova Scotia. Young Trinidadian midfielder Akeem Garcia, signed coming over from Santa Rosa of his country. Peruvian midfielder Juan Diego Gutierrez, signed coming over from Sport Rosario of his country. Young Japanese midfielder Koda Ida, signed out of the Open Trials, coming from Washington Premier FC of the U.S. Soccer Development Academy. Veteran Trinidadian midfielder Elton John is coming over after captaining San Juan Jablota of his country. Canadian Kwame Uatara is another player from the Open Trials. He played for Moncton University in MYsports. Young Trinidadian midfielder Andre Rampersad, signed coming over from his country Sai Santa Rosa as well. And young Canadian Elias Simmons, signed coming over from Dalkurd FF of Sweden. Finally, the forwards. Canadian Mohamed Karuma played for FC Miami of the USL League 2 last year. 19-year-old Canadian Vincent Lamy is another product coming out of the Montreal Impact Academy. Veteran Colombian Luis Alberto Pereira is the former FC Dallas man. He signed coming over from his country side La Equidad. Young Canadian Tomas Skublak is joining after playing college soccer for the University of South Florida of the NCAA, and signed 19-year-old Canadian Abdel Aziz Youssef. And coast to coast to the team from Vancouver Island, Pacific FC. They'll be playing at West Hill Stadium under coach Michael Silberbauer. He most previously served as assistant coach for Swiss club FC Luzerne. And for the players on his roster, Canadian goalkeeper Mark Village was with FC Cincinnati last year in the USL Championship. Young Canadian goalkeeper Nolan Worth was with Phoenix Rising FC of the USL Championship last year. The defenders are young Canadian Matthew Baldizimo is a Vancouver Whitecaps product, joining from Fresno FC of the USL Championship. 20-year-old Canadian Caden Chung is also a Vancouver Whitecaps product, signed coming over from number 1 FC Kaiserslautern of Germany. Veteran Canadian Marcel De Jong is of course a former Vancouver Whitecaps player, also played for Sporting Kansas City and Ottawa Fury, and FC Augsburg of the Bundesliga before that. 19-year-old Canadian Emile Legault, signed coming over from AJ Auxerre U17 of France. Young Canadian Lucas McNaughton has joined from League 1 Ontario side Alliance United. Canadian Ryan McCurdy is a local boy, straight out of Vancouver Island University. Canadian Blake Smith is a former Montreal Impact man, on loan from MLS expansion side FC Cincinnati. And German Hendrik Sater-Rosic, signed coming over from Hallescher FC of his country. The midfielders are young Canadian Victor Blasco, was part of the Barcelona Academy in his youth, played soccer on the island for the past few years, as well as the Vancouver Whitecaps 2 in the USL Championship previously. 20-year-old Canadian Tyrone Campbell and 19-year-old Canadian Noah Verhoeven are Vancouver Whitecaps products joining from Fresno FC. Canadian Ben Fisk is a Whitecaps product himself, and a former FC Edmonton man. He signed coming over from Derry City, an Irish club. 18-year-old Canadian Jose Hernandez has come out of the Whitecaps residency. 18-year-old Canadian Alessandro Hojapour signed coming over from Lokomotiv Plovdiv of Bulgaria. And the forwards, veteran Canadian Marcus Hauber is a former Vancouver Whitecaps man. He signed coming over from Dundee, a Scottish club. And veteran Canadian Issy Nakajima Faran is a former Toronto FC and Montreal Impact player. He's joining over from Malaysian side Pahang. Next up we have Winnipeg's team Valor FC, and one of the 3 inaugural teams as well being the other founding member. Their home is the largest in the league Investors Group Field, and the coach Rob Gale was a Canada U20 men's national team head coach. So for the roster he has made, Canadian goalkeeper Tyson Farrago is a local boy and former FC Edmonton man. He's joining from WSA Winnipeg of the PDL, now known as USL League 2. Signed 20-year-old Belgian goalkeeper Matthias Janssens, coming over from La Louvière of his country. The defenders are Uruguayan defender Martin Arguina Reina, signed coming over from Boston River, a club from his country. 19-year-old Canadian Rafael Garcia has joined out of the Montreal Impact Academy. English defender Adam Mitter, signed coming over from Global Cebu of the Philippines. Canadian Jordan Merle, signed coming from Reno 1868 of the USL Championship. And Canadian Skylar Thomas is a Toronto FC Academy product, joining from USL Championship side Charleston Battery. On to the midfielders, young Canadian Louis Belangoyet was a Montreal Impact player and product. Young Canadian Dylan Carrero is a local boy, was the 2nd overall pick in the CPL U Sports draft out of York University. He was also part of the Toronto FC and Queen's Park Rangers Academy. Young Canadian Nicholas Galvis, signed coming over from Deportivo Pereira of Colombia. Veteran Croatian Gosi Golubar, signed coming over from Varazdin of his country. Young Canadian Diego Gutierrez, signed coming over from Chilean side Palestino. 20-year-old Canadian Glenn Muenkat has signed coming over from number 1 FC Kaiserslautern of Germany. Young Canadian Raphael Ohin is another player joining from WSA Winnipeg. Young Canadian Michael Petrasso was a Toronto FC Academy player before becoming a Queen's Park Ranger product. He played for the Montreal Impact and Ottawa Fury last season. 20-year-old Canadian Federico Pena, signed coming over from Belgian side Standard de Liège. Young Canadian Dylan Sacramento is joining out of League 1 Ontario club Vaughan Azzurri. And the forwards, 17-year-old Canadian Tyler Attardo, signed coming over from Italian side Chievo Verona of Serie A. Young Canadian Callum Ferguson, signed out of the Open Trials. He previously played for Elgin City of Scotland. English forward Stephen Hoyle, signed coming over from Canterbury United from New Zealand. And young Canadian Ali Moose, joining from the Calgary Foothills club that won the 2018 PDL Championship. And last but definitely not the least, York 9 FC, representing the 9 municipalities of York Region north of Toronto. They will make York Lions Stadium their home until they build their own stadium. And the coach is Jim Brennan, who worked with Toronto FC after retiring with them. He coached the academy and then the reserve team, also served as the first team assistant coach. He was also the coach of Aurora FC of League One Ontario. And this is his club for the inaugural season. For the goalkeepers, Canadian Nathan Ingham is a native of Newmarket. He is a former FC Edmonton man. He is coming from the Pittsburgh Riverhounds of the USL Championship. Canadian Matt Silva, signed coming over from Austerlitz FF, a Swedish club. And Canadian Colm Vance joins out of Vaughan Azzurri, the League One Ontario champions. The defenders are 20-year-old Canadian Dia Eddie Nabzi is joining from AS Blainville, the Premier League de Soccer du Quebec back-to-back champions. Canadian Maury Donor is from Aurora United of League One Ontario. Young Canadian Stephen Furlano is a Toronto FC product. He's signed out of League One Ontario side Alliance United. Young Canadian Luca Gasparato, signed coming over from Greenock Morton of Scotland. Young Canadian Daniel Gogardi was the 4th overall pick in the CPL MYsports draft out of York University. Canadian Justin Springer played for the League One Ontario champions Vaughan Azzurri last season. And Canadian Roger Thompson, signed coming over from Ljungskile SK of Sweden. The midfielders are young Canadian Manuel Aparicio is a Toronto FC product, signing over from San Roque Lepe of Spain. Canadian Joseph Di Chiara, signed coming over from Lithuanian Saijonava. 20-year-old Canadian Emilio Estevez came out of the open tryouts. He played college soccer for Sheridan College. Young Japanese midfielder Wataru Murofushi, signed coming over from Alberix Niigata, the Singapore Premier League champions in which he captained and won Player of the Year. Canadian Kyle Porter was a Vancouver Whitecaps player and product. He's also a former DC United, FC Edmonton, and Ottawa Fury man. He's joining from the Tampa Bay Rowdies of the USL Championship. Canadian Ryan Telfer played for the York Lions in MYsports. He is on loan from Toronto FC. And young Canadian Emmanuel Zambasis was their 2nd-round pick in the MYsports draft from York University as well. Then lastly, the forwards. Swedish forward Simon Ajay, signed coming over from Assyriska IK of his country. Canadian Michael Cox is another former York Lion, also played for FC Edmonton. He is joining from the USL Championship side St. Louis FC. Chilean Rodrigo Gaddis, signed coming over from Santa Cruz of his country. Young Canadian Austin Ritchie has come out of League One Ontario champs Vaughan Azzurri. And 20-year-old Canadian Silent Rolux has come out of the Toronto FC Academy. So those are the rosters of our 7 teams in our inaugural Canadian Premier League season. And the future is looking really good for Canadian soccer, not only helping the development of our own players, but also allowing athletes from our own universities to play professionally. And the league has plans to grow up to 10 clubs next year. So it seems Ottawa Fury FC of the USL Championship could very much be joining in the near future, although they declined to join this season. But once there's enough clubs in the future, they can then change to the promotion and relegation format. So it's just so exciting that Canada finally has our long-awaited and much-anticipated soccer league. And so let's get the Canadian Premier League underway. Thanks so much for watching, please like and subscribe, and I hope you'll tune in to the next episode.